Picture two politicians screaming at each other on national television about dropping birth rates.
Oh, yeah. A very familiar scene.
Right. And one of them is passionately waving like a 500-page economic study proving that cash tax credits are the ultimate answer.
Yeah.
But then the other politician is aggressively waving this massive demographic study proving that housing costs are the real problem.
And the funny thing is, they both have data.
Exactly. They are both quoting highly funded institutional research.
Yeah.
They're both actually factually correct in their narrow domains.
Yep.
And yet, absolutely nothing gets solved. The argument just goes nowhere.
It never does.
So if you watch this, you really have to wonder, in a world overflowing with data and brilliant academics, why do our massive public policy arguments stay so simplistic and honestly unproductive for decades?
It creates this sense of profound gridlock. I mean, with all the intellectual firepower we have today, supercomputers running endless models, you'd expect the public debate to eventually mature, right?
You'd think.
But it usually doesn't. We just end up trading the same slogans back and forth year after year.
And that feeling of being stuck is the core of what we're unpacking today.
I'm really excited for this one.
Same here. For this deep dive, we're pulling from a fascinating essay called Non-Compilation by Elias Kunis. And our mission today is to dissect the hidden architectural failure behind modern discourse.
Because, as Kunis points out, we aren't just underinformed.
Right. It's not a lack of information.
No, the problem is far weirder than that. We are, to use his phrase, unevenly undercompiled.
Undercompiled, that is the crucial concept here. It completely shifts how you view the dysfunction in our public conversations.
It really does. Because the root of the confusion, according to the essay, is that we tend to treat research or, knowledge as one giant monolithic thing.
Like you either have the data or you don't.
Exactly. But Kunis argues we're actually confusing three very distinct objects of information, and the third one is almost always missing from the public square.
Okay, let's break those three objects down so we can actually see where the system is breaking.
Sure. So first, you have the academic synthesis. This is the foundation.
The heavy stuff.
Very heavy. It's dense, highly technical literature written by peers for peers. Think of a massive, peer-reviewed demographic study filled with complex regression analyses.
Standard deviations, p-values, all of that.
Right. It is rigorous and accurate, but it is entirely illegible to the intelligent generalist.
It's not supposed to be read by the average voter or even the average politician, really. It's built for other specialists.
Which leads to the second object, institutional compilation outputs.
Okay, so what are those?
These are specialized reports created by dedicated organizations to make the academic synthesis somewhat actionable.
Okay.
So a great example would be like a Congressional Budget Office score on a new bill or an IPCC summary report on climate change.
So they translate the hardcore math into legible summaries.
Yes. But again, these are generally built for the engaged staffer class. The legislative aides, specialized journalists, think tank researchers.
Which brings us to the third object. And this is the one that really blew my mind.
It's the missing link.
It is, because it's the one we desperately need but rarely have. Kunis calls it the public usable decision frame.
This is the missing artifact.
Yeah.
And what makes the public usable decision frame unique is that it's defined entirely by its structural form.
Right, not by who reads it or how popular it is.
Exactly. It is a reusable artifact that parameterizes a decision.
Okay, let's pause on parameterizes a decision because that sounds a bit academic.
Fair enough.
What we mean is that it gives the everyday generalist an actual question shape to evaluate a new policy.
Yeah, a question shape is a great way to put it.
Right, because instead of saying, should we build a bridge, which is just an invitation to yell about whether bridges are good or bad, a parameterized frame asks specific questions.
Like, what is the traffic load?
Exactly. What is the cost of steel? What is the expected lifespan? It establishes the variables so you can plug in the data.
And that structural setup prevents you from just using data as ammunition to win a partisan argument. Yeah. It forces you to actually evaluate the mechanics of the problem.
Listening to you describe this flow from academic research to institutional output to public frame, it sounds exactly like trying to build a house.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, you can think of the academic synthesis as the raw materials. The academics are out there in the quarry, baking the bricks, mixing the cement.
Right.
Then the institutional outputs, that's like the inventory list handed to the construction foreman. It tells them they have, 10,000 bricks and 50 bags of cement.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
But the public usable decision frame, That's the actual blueprint. It tells you how the bricks fit together to make a wall.
Yes.
And right now, the public is trying to argue about how to build the house of public policy, and no one has ever handed us the blueprint. We're just standing in a field throwing bricks at each other.
That is a perfect analogy. We are arguing about architecture using only raw materials.
Just throwing bricks.
Literally.
Right.
And because we lack that blueprint, the public usable frame, we inevitably fall back on the most basic cognitive heuristics available to us.
Which are slogans and tribal alliances.
Exactly. So let's ground this in reality by looking at the cleanest specimen of this missing blueprint, the global fertility debate.
Oh, man. Yeah. Populations are aging rapidly, birth rates are dropping below replacement levels across the OECD, and governments are panicking.
Panic is the right word. It is the pristine textbook example of non-compilation.
Because we have so much data on this right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What is so striking about the fertility crisis is that the academic substrate, those raw bricks, is incredibly rich.
It's been mapped out for decades.
Decades, we aren't lacking data. Back in 1978, a demographer named John Bongards laid out what is known as the proximate determinants framework.
And he wasn't writing, like, cultural op-eds, right?
No, not at all. He was doing the hard biological and timeline math of human reproduction, tracking biological variables, exact windows of fertility, the space between births.
So the pure mechanics of making a human being are fully mapped.
Fully mapped. Then you have Wolfgang Lotz, who modeled population dynamics through human capital, showing exactly how education and public health shift those biological timelines.
Wow.
And you have Gösta Esping-Andersen, who meticulously mapped out the welfare regimes that shape family formation. The experts deeply understand how the gears of this machine turn.
But then you turn on the Sunday morning talk shows or open a social media app and you see literally none of that mechanical understanding.
None of it.
The public debate is just a war of single-lever slogans. One side is shouting, cash transfers work, give parents money.
Yeah.
Another side says, no, young people are just selfish and don't want kids. Culture is the problem. And a third group says, housing is too expensive, fix zoning, and the babies will follow.
And the crazy thing is, each of those claims represents a valid candidate input.
Right. They aren't entirely wrong.
Housing matters. Money matters. Culture matters.
Yeah.
But they are entirely partial. They don't answer the question that the academic literature already knows how to ask.
So what is the missing blueprint here?
Well, the uncompiled frame is a concept we can visualize as a multi-gate pipeline.
Walk us through this multi-gate pipeline, because this seems to be where the house actually gets built.
Think of having a child not as a single choice, but as a pipeline with a series of interacting constraints, or gates, that a person has to pass through.
Okay.
First, there's the gate of meeting someone. Then the gate of pair stability, actually staying together.
Right.
Then the gate of housing feasibility. Then cultural permission. And finally, biological execution.
So you have to pass through all these gates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These aren't perfectly sequential for everyone, but they intensely interact. And the fundamental rule of this pipeline is that a policy will only result in a birth if it relaxes the specific gate that is binding.
The binding constraint.
Right, for the marginal missing child in that specific population.
Okay, so to make sure we really get the mechanics of this, if the gate that is jammed shut, the binding constraint is meeting someone and forming a stable pair,
Yes.
then it mathematically does not matter how much money a government throws at the childcare subsidy gate further down the pipeline.
You absolutely cannot mathematically fix an upstream bottleneck with a downstream subsidy.
It's like pouring water into the end of a blocked pipe.
It doesn't unblock the source. And this is playing out in the real data right now. The essay points to Lyman Stone's demographic analysis from 2019.
What did he find?
He argued that at least half, and potentially up to 75% or more since the year 2000, of the increase in the U.S. fertility gap is tied to postponed marriage.
Wait, really? Which completely upends the public narrative.
Totally upends it.
Because that means the missing kids aren't primarily coming from married couples deciding to have one kid instead of three.
No, the fertility rate within married couples hasn't actually crashed that much.
Wow. So the collapse is upstream. In the rate of pair formation itself, people aren't partnering up in time.
Exactly. So if a politician proposes a massive childcare tax credit to fix the birth rate, but the actual binding constraint is that young adults aren't pairing up to begin with.
They are pulling a lever that isn't even connected to the blockage.
Right. But because the public doesn't possess the multi-gate pipeline blueprint, we don't evaluate the mechanics.
We just argue over whether a tax credit is a morally good or bad lever in isolation.
We lack the disposition to ask which gate is binding. We only ask, which lever do I like?
That is wild. So has any country actually figured this out? Has anyone managed to write this public blueprint for fertility?
The closest anyone has come is in Finland.
Okay, what are they doing?
Anna Rotkerch conducted frontier work for the Finnish government, pointing out that 75% of Finland's severe fertility decline in the 2010s was due to fewer first children being born.
Interesting.
Her 2024 work introduces this explicit framing of a relationship recession.
Relationship recession. That immediately shifts your brain away from tax credits and toward the social fabric.
It moves the focus way upstream to everyday life management, dating culture, couple services.
So they have the blueprint.
Well, Kunis notes that even this, which represents the absolute global frontier of demographic public policy, still falls just short of a fully reusable artifact.
Oh, really? Why?
Because an intelligent generalist can't easily pick up Rodkirch's Finnish report and use it to flawlessly parameterize and evaluate, say, a Korean cash transfer policy or a Hungarian housing subsidy.
Ah.
The strict, universally public usable decision frame for fertility genuinely just does not exist yet.
I have to push back here, though.
Go for it.
Because as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking about other massive policy debates. What about taxes?
Okay, taxes.
We do have public usable blueprints for taxation. We have the Tax Policy Center. We have the Congressional Budget Office. We have dynamic modeling tools that anyone can go look up online.
That's true.
The blueprints exist. The variables are laid out. But if you look at the public discourse around taxes, it is just as simplistic and just as slogan-driven as the fertility debate. So if handing people the blueprint is the magical fix, why is tax discourse still completely broken?
That is the essential counterexample Kunis explores, and it proves that simply compiling the frame is not enough.
Okay.
If fertility is the specimen for non-compilation, meaning that the frame doesn't exist, tax is the specimen for its sibling failure mode,
Which is?
non-adoption, or what the essay terms calculemus.
Calculemus.
Yes, it refers to a demand-side failure. This is what happens when the public usable frame does exist, perfectly constructed, but the public actively rejects it or weaponizes it.
Weaponizes it? Like how?
The canonical example used here is the Laffer curve.
Oh, the Laffer curve. Anyone who has paid attention to politics in the last 40 years has heard of this one.
Exactly. And structurally speaking, and we're looking at this purely as analysts of discourse, without taking any political stance on tax policy itself, the Laffer curve was originally designed as a real parameterized frame.
It wasn't just a slogan.
No. It asked a very specific variable-based question. At what tax rate does the government hit the revenue maximizing point, and where is our current economy relative to that point?
Right. The logic being that if you tax people at 100%, they stop working or hide their money, and you get zero revenue.
Right.
And if you tax them at 0%, you also obviously get zero revenue. So there's a curve.
And the frame asks, are we on the left side or the right side of the peak?
Okay, so if you are on the right side of the peak, cutting taxes theoretically increases government revenue because it stimulates enough hidden or lost economic activity to make up the difference.
Exactly. And if you are on the left side, cutting taxes mathematically reduces revenue. The Laffer curve gave the public a beautiful question shape to evaluate tax policy.
But that is absolutely not how it is used in mass discourse today.
Not at all.
In mass media, it completely degraded from a question shape into a captured slogan. The variables were totally erased, and it just became the phrase, tax cuts pay for themselves.
End of sentence.
Right. No curve, no peak, just a rule.
The frame was metabolized into factional ammunition. So the deeper question Kunis asks is, why does the public refuse to compute the math when the blueprint is sitting right in front of them?
Why do they?
The answer is that, in human psychology, coalitional utility beats epistemic utility.
Coalitional utility, meaning if you're listening to this and thinking about the last time you argued about taxes or welfare at a family dinner,
Yeah.
you probably were arguing about the elasticity of taxable income. You were arguing about what felt fair and whose side you were on.
Exactly. You care more about signaling loyalty to your political tribe than you care about getting the math perfectly accurate.
Tax the rich or no new taxes are coordination signals.
They identify who your friends and enemies are in the room. If you introduce a parameterized frame that says, well, the answer actually depends on the behavioral elasticity of top earners, you force your political allies to disagree on variables.
And it destroys the cohesion of your coalition.
Yes. Parameterizing a problem actually forces you to argue with your own friends.
Wow. And Kunis makes another brilliant point here. He says, a compiled frame dissolves the moral object. What does that mean in practice?
Well, think about the structure of political advocacy groups.
Yeah.
An advocacy group relies on a clear, absolute moral position to survive, mobilize volunteers, and fundraise.
Sure.
If their core position is, we must support families with universal cash transfers because it is a moral imperative to help children, that have absolute undeniable force.
Right, it's morally black and white.
But if you introduce the compiled multi-gate pipeline and say, actually, cash transfers are only effective if downstream household feasibility is the binding constraint for this specific demographic, otherwise the money does nothing.
The moral absolute dissolves into an engineering problem.
Exactly. It turns a crusade into a math equation.
And crusades don't run on math.
They really don't.
Oh.
Both sides of the moral camp will suddenly experience the compiled frame as hostile to their fundraising and their identity.
That is so interesting. So if the blueprints for things like taxes and climate change exist but get aggressively ignored for tribal reasons, that brings me back to fertility.
Where the blueprint doesn't even exist yet.
Right. If institutions are failing to compile these frames, why hasn't someone else stepped up?
It's a good question.
Why hasn't a motivated graduate student or, I don't know, an amateur systems thinker with a Substack just sat down on a weekend and built the perfect fertility frame? The data is public. It doesn't seem mathematically impossible.
Punis notes that it's not cognitively impossible, but it is institutionally almost unwritable.
Why unwritable?
The supply-side failure comes down to broken incentives across the board. Look at the people who could build it. Academics are rewarded for finding tight, narrow causal estimates getting published for proving one tiny variable.
Not for writing broad, usable syntheses for the general public.
Right, and ministries and government departments are rewarded for applying the specific operational toolkits.
So if an agency's budget is entirely dedicated to housing subsidies, they are not going to spend their time building a model that proves dating apps are the actual binding constraint.
Exactly. And as we just discussed, political parties are rewarded for clear battle lines.
While journalists are largely rewarded for highlighting conflict and narrative.
Yes. So this vital job of translating the academic synthesis into a public blueprint is, as the essay perfectly puts it, structurally homeless.
Structurally homeless, no ordinary institutional role owns the translation function.
It falls entirely to what we might call intellectual entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Independent thinkers, essayists, public intellectuals.
Okay, so why haven't they done it for fertility?
Here is where fertility differs drastically from tax or climate. A tax model asks about financial elasticity. It's dry. It's safe.
Yeah.
A fertility model. That collides with the most deeply defended, intensely private parts of human existence.
It forces you to look at extreme intimacy.
You cannot build a comprehensive fertility model without inspecting the soul of the citizen. It asks uncomfortable questions about sex, dating status, gender bargaining within a household, biological time limits.
The realities of modern romance.
All of it. Add to that the incredibly dark historical shadow of 20th century eugenics, which makes any engineering-style framing of human reproduction feel visceral and dangerous.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So the exact people who would normally love to build these complex systems, models, the intellectual entrepreneurs who map out housing supply or energy grids, they look at the fertility debate.
They see the absolute minefield of gender politics and intimacy.
And go, nope, not touching that. I'll go write about carbon taxes instead.
Exactly. It acts as a severe filter. It filters out the exact cognitive profiles equipped to compile the frame.
It's a stack of weak filters that compose into an impenetrable wall.
And if an amateur does try to write it anyway, they run into the dominant norm of the internet, which is to have a strong thesis.
Write a hot take.
But the thesis of a compiled frame isn't a hot take. The thesis is simply, you are all asking the question in the wrong shape. Here is the new shape.
Which violates the whole instinct of modern essay writing. Partisans want ammunition. Voters want morality. No audience is waiting to be told their question shape is wrong.
Nobody wants to hear that.
So if the blueprint doesn't exist, and the people who could build it are incentivized to stay away, it seems like we're permanently stuck in this slogan loop.
It feels that way.
Unless we can somehow force institutions to build and adopt these frames, does history provide a playbook for how to actually fix this?
It does, actually. History shows us exactly how these new translation genres propagate. And Kunis maps this out as a dual repair strategy.
Okay, how does that work?
Historically, this repair happens in distinct phases. It almost always starts with epistemic invention.
Epistemic invention.
Yeah. It usually takes a lone catalyst who just gets fed up with the chaos
Yeah.
and invents the question shape themselves.
The essay gives a brilliant historical precedent for this from the medical field, right?
Yeah.
A Scottish doctor named Archie Cochrane in 1972. Before him, clinical guidance for doctors was apparently a total mess of competing vibes and opinions.
It was chaos.
And he just stepped back and asked three brutally simple questions. Can it work? Does it work? Is it worth it?
That simple intervention by Cochrane was the invention of evidence-based medicine's question shape. It parameterized the decision for doctors.
Wow.
But a lone catalyst publishing a book isn't enough to change an entire global industry.
Right, you need more than a book.
That requires the next phase, boundary infrastructure. You need a dedicated organization to standardize the form, train practitioners, and forcefully matchmake the new frame to the actual decision makers.
So for Cochrane, that was the establishment of the Cochrane Collaboration.
Exactly. Another modern example is JPAL, the Poverty Action Lab. They built the infrastructure to scale things like deworming programs to hundreds of millions of children by standardizing the evaluation frame.
And then comes the final, most crucial step, which Kunis calls institutional capture.
Yes.
Which sounds a little sinister, honestly.
It does, but it just means the frame finally gets institutional teeth.
It becomes procedurally consequential. You can't just ignore it anymore.
The classic example here is Robert McNamara when he became U.S. Secretary of Defense in the 1960s.
What did he do?
Well, imagine a room full of powerful four-star generals who were entirely used to just saying, I need more bombers because my gut says so.
Right.
McNamara comes in and imposes Rand Corporation's rigorous systems analysis on the Pentagon. He tells the generals, show me the systems analysis, show me the parameters.
And if they didn't?
If they didn't use his analytical frame, they got zero budget.
Oh, wow. So the frame only lasts when ignoring it has real immediate consequences?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the roadmap for dual repair means we have to treat our two different failure modes differently.
Okay, so for a topic like fertility, where we are suffering from pure non-compilation.
We desperately need that first phase. We need brave intellectual entrepreneurs willing to brave the social minefield, invent the question shape, name the gates in the pipeline, and produce the missing blueprint.
But for topics like tax policy or climate change, where the frame already exists but is ignored or captured for coalitional utility.
We absolutely don't need another Substack essay explaining the math.
Right. We need institutional teeth.
Yes. That could look like a required editorial standard in prestige journalism or a strict debate moderator protocol that cuts off politicians who don't answer the parameters.
Or a budgetary gating function in government similar to McNamara's Pentagon.
You have to design a system that makes waging a slogan war incredibly costly for its participants.
Man, that is so clarifying. To synthesize the journey we've been on today. Our public debates are fundamentally broken because a system fails wherever reality enters through a channel the institution doesn't own.
Exactly.
We don't have the translation artifacts to turn academic bricks into public blueprints. And where we do have the blueprints, we lack the institutional teeth to force people to use them. But just naming this absence, realizing that we are collectively fighting without a blueprint, is the first necessary step toward letting reality act as a correction to our endless, exhausting narratives.
It really allows you to step back from the outrage of the day and ask, are we even having the right argument?
And that is exactly how this applies to you listening to this right now. The next time you turn on the news or you hear a politician, a pundit, or even a friend yelling passionately about pulling one specific lever to fix a massive societal problem.
I want you to mentally check.
Yeah.
Does this person actually possess the blueprint of the problem? Or are they just gripping a single brick and pretending it's a house?
It is a remarkably powerful filter for preserving your sanity and evaluating the information you consume.
It really is.
It changes everything, and I want to leave you with one final specific challenge to mull over on your own time. Look at your own industry, look at your workplace, or a cause you deeply care about in your own community.
Are the arguments you have with your peers or your management stuck in a slogan loop?
Are you all just arguing over bricks? If you were tasked with building the public usable decision frame to finally stop the flame wars in your own life, what would the shape of your questions look like?
That's the real question.
Think about that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.